Hey there. Remember that election in Poland back in 2020? The one where the entire country was split east versus west? Everyone was glued to the results, even those who don't even like elections that
Oh,
much.
yeah, I know what you mean.
It really got us thinking, like, how is it that with millions of voters with totally different views, things end up so close? Like, what are the
Yeah,
odds?
it's really strange when you think about it.
And it turns out there is some seriously interesting research out there that tries to answer that. So today we're doing a deep dive on this new paper, and it uses, get this, physics to figure out why elections are often so close.
Physics?
Yeah, you heard me right, physics. Now I know what you're thinking.
I bet I do.
But trust me, this is not like your high school physics class. This is way cooler.
Yeah, I'm intrigued.
So the paper is called Dislike of General Opinion Makes for Tight Elections.
Catchy. I like it. And you can find it on rxiv.org, which is basically a site where researchers can share their work before it's officially published in a journal.
Oh, cool. So it's like a sneak peek.
Exactly. So what's the main idea here? Well, this paper uses something called the Ising model.
Okay.
And before you go, picturing physicists in lab coats hanging out at voting booths with magnets. Let me explain. It's actually a pretty simple concept. Imagine each voter as like a tiny magnet.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Okay, so each of these voter magnets is influenced by their neighbors, their friends and family and all that. And just like magnets pull on each other, people's opinions can influence those around them.
Yeah, that makes sense. We all know how strong those social circles can be,
Right.
but there's got to be a twist here. It wouldn't be a deep dive without a good twist. You know it. And this is where it gets really interesting. This model brings in another factor. Opinion polls.
Wait.
Okay.
You mean those things that we always see during elections? Those might be why elections are always so close.
Exactly. And it's not about people just blindly following what the polls say. It's actually the opposite. The paper suggests that even a little bit of that, well, everyone else thinks that, so I'm going to disagree, can have a huge impact.
So like reverse psychology, but on a huge scale?
Kind of, yeah. It's this fascinating back and forth. Like, you want to fit in with your friends, but you also want to stand out and have your own opinion, even if it means going against the grain.
Interesting.
So we've got all these like metaphorical magnets, right? Drawn together by their social groups, but also pushing back against what they see in the polls. So where does that leave us?
That brings us to the paper's big idea, what they call the split society phase. And the really cool thing is, it's not just some theory. They actually did, simulations ran the numbers. And they found a clear point where this phase shows up.
Okay, I think I'm with you on the magnets so far. But what is this split society phase? I mean, what does it actually look like in a real election?
Okay, so think of like a huge game of tug of war. But neither side can win. They're just stuck in this back and forth. That's kind of what happens in the split society phase. You've got voters being pulled in two different directions, by their friends and family on one side, and then by their desire to disagree with those polls on the other side.
Oh, wow. So are you saying that those polls are actually making things more divided?
Yeah, basically. It creates this really interesting dynamic, this need to be different to be an individual, even if that just means disagreeing. It starts to change everything. And it's not just a guess or anything. The math actually supports it.
Okay.
This split society phase, it's like a mix of order and chaos.
Okay, now that sounds kind of contradictory. How can something be orderly and chaotic?
I know, it's weird, right? Think of it like this. Within each group, so the people who agree on things, their opinions are mostly stable. That's the order part.
Yeah.
But then the balance between those two groups, that's super fragile. Any little thing can change it, like a super sensitive scale, always moving back and forth. That's the chaos.
So does this split society phase happen in every election? Or are there certain types of elections where we see it more?
That's a great question. And the paper actually looked into that. It seems like the size of the election really matters. You think about it like this. In a small town, everyone knows each other, right? So it's easier for everyone to agree on things.
Right.
But when you have a huge election, like a national election with millions of voters, those connections are weaker. And that's when you get the split society phase.
So you're saying that once you have enough voters, close elections are just inevitable?
Well, not quite. The paper says the shift happens around 1 million voters.
Yeah.
But that's based on a lot of assumptions about like social networks and stuff. So different countries with different social structures, they might have different tipping points.
That makes sense.
But it's still a really interesting idea. And it seems to match what we see in a lot of big democracies.
Totally. And remember that Polish election we were talking about?
Yeah, with the East-West split. Well, the paper says that those old borders are still like fault lines. They make it easier for the split society phase to happen.
Oh, wow. So it's like those old divisions are still affecting how people connect today.
Exactly.
That's crazy. So it's not even just about today's politics. It's about this deeper history that's still important.
Yeah, and this idea of fault lines, you could apply that to so many things.
Like what?
Well, like the differences between cities and the countryside, or even these echo chambers you see online.
It's like we're always going to have these close calls no matter what.
Seems like it.
So if we're always on the edge of a 50-50 split, what does that mean for democracy?
That's a big question.
Is it more stable because no one group can get too powerful? Or is it actually more fragile because any little thing could change the outcome?
I mean, it's like this model gives us a whole new way to think about democracy. If we're always in this split society state, then the stakes are always really high. Every single vote, every voice really matters.
And that makes those opinion polls even more important, right? Because they're not just telling us what people think, they're actually changing how people think.
Exactly. It's a loop. The polls change the voters, and the voters change the polls. And it all stays balanced.
So the next time I'm watching an election, I'll be thinking about those voter magnets, all lining up and pushing each other around.
Me too. It's a whole new way to understand why elections are always so close.
It makes you wonder if we can use this knowledge to make things better. Like maybe we can help people be more informed and more involved in the process.
That's a great question. And maybe a deep dive for another day.
Yeah.
Well, we'll save that for next time. But I think we gave everyone a lot to think about today.
Definitely. We went from talking about tiny magnets to global politics. We talked about the math behind close elections, and we even talked about how we interact with each other and with information during these big events.
So to everyone listening, next time you're watching an election, try to see it through this split society lens. I bet you'll never see elections the same way again.